thanks so much for joining me today. Today I want to share a project that I created using some stamps from Prima, and I also am going to be using some of their watercolors as well to create these fun watercolored cards. Here's a look at the two stamp sets that I used today to create these cards. These are by Christine Aldorf, and they are gorgeous. I love the really whimsical feel of that one there on the right, and then there's that one on the left that's a little bit more elegant. But I think these are beautiful and so much fun to be able to use on cards. These are fairly large stamps and they cover a card really well, so you can use these to create a nice focal point on your card. I'm going to be stamping these flowers in some Simon Says Stamp Clear ink because I'm going to do some heat embossing. I'm going to be creating a watercolor resist effect, and I'm going to use some silver pearl embossing powder from Ranger to use as the embossing powder for my images. I chose the silver pearl because it has a nice shimmer to it, and I thought that would dress up the stamped images really nicely. It's subtle, so it's not too distracting for the actual flowers itself, but the shimmer adds just a little bit of interest to the whole card design. And once I've stamped and heat embossed this one, I also stamped the little sketched whimsical flowers as well and used the same embossing powder. Now I'm going to go ahead and watercolor these images. I'll show you how I watercolored both the whimsical flowers, which I'm working on first, and then I'll show you how I watercolored the more elegant flowers. I'm going to be creating a really interesting effect that's more of a messy watercolor, but I first want to go ahead and create the coloring inside of all of my heat embossed areas. And I'm going to be fairly clean with the watercoloring as I start off. I'm going to be trying to stay in the lines and kind of just keep it nice and neat. I'm not going to worry about if I get out of the lines in any areas, but for the most part I'm going ahead and trying to stay inside the lines. And I'll show you what I do to go ahead and create the messy watercolor look. I think this is a perfect way to create the messy watercolor. Sometimes it can be hard to know where you need to be messy and where you want it to be a little bit more intact. But with this technique, it's really fun because it allows the water to move the color to wherever it feels like going. And I think it feels more natural that way. It doesn't feel so deliberately planned or anything, just kind of is random with the placement of the water. And I'll show you how I did that in a second here. I'm mixing up my own custom colors from these palettes. These palettes are a combination of colors from the Decadent Pies, the Tropicals, and the Classics watercolor palettes, all from Prima. Prima also has two other palettes that they have recently added to their collection. I only have these three palettes right now, but I do love them, and this range of palettes allows me to get all the different colors I need. I'm looking forward to getting the other colors just so I can add them to my collection and have a little bit more options when I'm watercoloring. I'll go ahead and let you watch the coloring of the other flower, which is pretty similar. I'll play a little music, and I'll be back in just a few seconds. Okay, so now I'm finishing up the coloring and I'm going to move on to creating the messy watercolor look. I do this by spraying the paper really heavily with water, and that allows the ink to be able to move outside of the heat embossed areas and really bleed into the rest of the paper. I think that really creates that fun messy look. I also intensify that messy look by adding splatters to my background, and that creates a more textured appearance and just adds some flecks of color in some random areas. You'll notice that I lift off the color after I apply a layer of splatter. That's just because I like the more subtle look instead of the intense dots. That allows them to kind of fade into the background and not be too distracting. I also wanted to add a bit more detailed areas to these flowers. Even though they have that messy watercolor look, I think adding the extra details really defines the flowers. So I'm using some Prismacolor colored pencils. You can use any types of colored pencils for this. I'm just using Prismacolor because that's what I have. And I'm adding some extra shading and lines to the flowers and leaves just to give them a little bit more interest and have them have a bit more dimension. Once all of my watercoloring was finished, I created two card bases. one from a yellow cardstock and then the other from a teal cardstock. Both of these colors matched my cards perfectly. I'm also going to trim down the panels of my watercolor paper with a stitched rectangle die from Simon Says Stamp. I'll go ahead and run this through my Big Shot machine, and then I'll take a bit of foam tape to go ahead and pop this up on the back side of my watercolor panel. I use double-sided stick adhesive to go ahead and attach that fun foam down, and then I'll go ahead and remove the adhesive backing and attach all of this onto my actual card bases. For my sentiments, I'm using a couple from the Alta News Be Strong stamp set. This has some really fun cactuses and other fun Southwestern themed images. I'm going to be using just the sentiments today because I thought they matched really well with these flowers. I'm going to stamp the first sentiment onto a piece of burnt orange cardstock, and I'm going to prep it first with some EK Success powder tool just to make sure I cut down on any static cling. I'm going to do some heat embossing with this. I'm going to go ahead and trim this panel down into a little sentiment strip, and once I've trimmed that down, I'll go ahead and also trim the sides down just a little bit. I popped up that sentiment with a bit of foam tape, and then I'll attach that down to the bottom portion of my card. I repeated the same process for the sentiment that's on my other card, except I used green cardstock and I ended up aligning the sentiment towards the left instead of in the middle. Because these cards have a more natural feel, I wanted to use something else on this card to really carry that natural feel. I felt that this beautiful hemp from Hemp Teak would work perfectly for creating a little bow that I could tuck along the left-hand side of my card. So I just tied that into a bow and trimmed down the ends, and you can see how these cards come together. I think these really have this fun, soft, natural feel that are really beautiful. Now I'm creating some matching envelopes to go with my cards. I cut them using the We Are Memory Keepers envelope punch board, and I used some mixed media paper from Canson to go ahead and create the envelope. I'm taking a variety of colors of watercolor from the Prima watercolor palettes, and I really diluted them with a lot of water, and that's because I really wanted a light color. And I chose colors that matched the coloring on my cards really well. So I'll continue layering colors together. I'm overlapping things, and that's just going to allow me to have a fun, organic looking envelope that has a nice pale color tone. I want to create a shadow stamp of the flowers that I used on my cards itself, just the way the envelope matches a little bit more with the card itself. I'm going to first stamp off the intense coloring of the ink that's on this flower stamp. I used some Moonrock Alta New ink. I'll stamp that off onto a piece of scratch paper, and then I'll go ahead and stamp this fully down onto my envelope, pressing it really well to make sure I transfer that ink. And you can see I'm left with this fun, beautiful ghost-like image of the flowers that we used on our cards. I also repeated the same process for the other card that I had created as well, and I just swapped out the stamp for the one that was going to be matching the card. So I hope that these cards have inspired you to do some watercoloring today. In case you didn't know, today is Plant a Flower Day, which is just a fun holiday in March that is celebrated on March 12th today. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section below or head on over to the Simon Says Stamp blog where you can find more details including supplies and still pictures. Thanks so much for watching this video. Please give it a big thumbs up, and I will see you again tomorrow for a new Studio Monday video. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you again soon. Bye!